Hello, family. How y'all doing today? Y'all good? All right, all right. All right, I have the privilege and honor to introduce a woman I've known for 28 years. 28, yeah, 28, yeah, 28 years. Um, there's a lot of things I can say about her. She's an amazing woman of God. She's my better half, and she's somebody I know that's is real. And so I don't want to take too much time, but I want to introduce you to Miss Latasha Dawson.
Good afternoon. My name is Latasha Dawson. I'm a faithful believer of Jesus Christ who has struggled with fear, rejection, all stemming from childhood trauma. The Bible says in 2 Timothy 1 and 7 that God has not given us the spirit of fear, but power, love, and a sound mind. But if I can be honest, the very foundation of my childhood was rooted in fear, abandonment, rejection. My father, he was an alcoholic. He used substance. I later found, not until I had my son that's 10 years old, after I had him, I found out that he was struggling with mental illness his whole life. They viewed it as a birthmark, or they called it maybe a demon or something like that. He was schizophrenic. And because of that, he struggled his life and he didn't get the help that he needed. And I grew up in this home. It was full of violence. But before then, my mom, when she met him, he presented as a Christian, and he was going to church, and he even changed his name, y'all, to Jesse Johnson. My maiden name is Latasha Johnson. He changed his name, so she couldn't really connect him to the name. He had murdered his first wife. She didn't know it. And later on, they got married, and the violence began. He began to be very abusive to her. We would be in the other room sleeping, and we didn't know if she was dead or alive. My nervous system, it really never learned how to be calm. It was always dysregulated. I lived a life of fear. Fast forward, my mom, she grew up, her dad was a Baptist preacher. So there were always biblical principles taught in our home. My mom, she was very strict, conservative. So on one end, I'm being taught like very conservative of Christian values, the fear of the Lord, and then on the other end, I'm suffering. And it was a hush hush. We don't talk about, what happens in this house. That's kind of how it was. So I really didn't learn how to be present with my emotions. I learned how to bury them. I learned how to suppress them. At a very young age, I started disassociating. I would go into alternate realities just to escape the trauma, the abuse that was going on in the home. And my parents eventually, they got a divorce. I lived with anxiety that it came back, and it haunted me. Anxiety in everything that I done. And as I was growing up in the church, I began to develop a relationship with God, and I began to watch the people be healed, set free. I grew up in a holiness Church of God in Christ, Pentecostal church. So we believe in speaking in tongues. I was a teenager. I was baptized with the Holy Spirit. I began to grow, but I was suffering. I was going through so many trials that no one knew, because we weren't really supposed to talk about what was going on in our home. And through all of that, when I was going through all of that, I knew I wanted something different for my life. Before I was even born, they spoke over me like, don't have a kid with him. Your child gonna have that same birthmark. They were saying, oh, she's gonna be like him. She's gonna have mental illness. And mental illness, is just a part of the fallen world. How many of you know that? Because sin has entered into our world, there's sickness, there's disease, there's mental illness. That was never God's plan. That was never God's design for us. But because we live in a fallen world, we fall victim to mental illness. Illnesses in our bodies, sicknesses. And how many of you know if you have untreated mental illness, a lot of times individuals cope with drugs and alcohol. A lot of times these individuals don't want to live. They don't want to live. They don't even want to see tomorrow. They can't be happy because if someone demonizes your illness that you're experiencing in your body, you're never going to feel normal. So God's word tell us to get an understanding. He even says, my people perish for the lack of knowledge. My people, when I was growing up, I remember my mom, she had took us to a psychologist, and he had told her, oh, your girls, they're never going to be right. They're never going to be the same. Everything that they have suffered, even you would never, live a normal functioning life. You would think we would have stayed, in counseling, but we didn't. It was more so of evaluation because my mom, she was a woman of faith. And she was like, no, not my kids. But, you do have to have balance. So she was a prayer warrior. She still is to this day. Matter of fact, she told me she's 70 something. And she was like, my knees been hurting. I said, Mom, why your knees hurting? And then I said, you've been doing too much because she's a busybody. She does a lot. And then she's like praying. She's like, I've been praying for years on my knees for hours and hours. My mom, she was those prayers that carried us. And just going back, tonight, I want to share how God took my life, rooted in fear, rejection, and brokenness, and turned it into purpose. So my parents, they finally divorced, and I still was in fear. You would think, oh, it's over. He's gone. But guess what? My nervous system had been built on that. I had so many cognitive distortions. I could not see myself in a normal light. I had a void in my life where I was missing a father figure. So that led me to seek out other father figures, which often led to abuse in some type of way, manipulation in some type of way, things that I had to heal from, things that could have turned me away from God because of the position that they were in. But God, he was with me, even when I didn't feel like it. I remember crying out to him, God, where are you? Where are you, God, as a teenager? Because I couldn't see him. I couldn't feel him. And I was going through hell in my life, and I didn't know where he was. But God was there. He was always there. He was keeping me safe. He was carrying me. He was placing people in my life to open doors of opportunity for me. He was giving me favor even when I didn't recognize it at the time. He was keeping my mind even when they said that I would never be able to function as a normal adult. He kept me through all of that trauma. And then not only did he keep me, he began to heal me. He began to heal those broken areas of my life. And I went on, and I was like, no, I want something different for my life. No, this is not going to be it. I'm going to go get out of here. I want something different for my life. And that's exactly what I did. I done everything I needed to do. Didn't really know how to do it, but I said, I'm going to college. I had to figure it out. I had nobody to help me. But I knew that I wanted something different for my life. So if I had to ask questions, I asked questions. I asked people for help. I just wanted to get out of my situation. I wanted something different. I knew I wanted kids. And I knew the thing that I was going through, that I never wanted them to see it. I never wanted them to ever experience what it was like to live a life, in trauma, to live a life without their father to protect them, to leave them prey to anyone that can come and do anything to them. I never wanted them to experience that for their life. And so I went to college. I got my bachelor's degree in clinical laboratory science. But you know what? Even that was out of fear, because initially I wanted to be a doctor. And I said, okay, well, I'm gonna go to SU. They had the best nursing program. I always had a backup plan. So I said, I'm a major in nursing just in case I don't go to med school because I still have a job. Because that was my mindset. I had to think like that. I had to be strategic. And then I remember I had made a C in one of my classes, and I wasn't able to get into the nursing program. And they told me I was going to have to wait a whole nother semester, or no, a whole year to apply again. And I was like, nope, not doing that. And out of fear, I was like, I'm finna find another program in this medical field, and I'm finna major in it because I'm going on, and I'm not going to be delayed. And that's what I did within myself. And so I went to clinical laboratory science. I had no idea what it was, but I knew I was not finna wait another year, and I began to love it. I done that for 7 years after I graduated. I was a clinical laboratory scientist. I worked in West Memphis for 2 years at Crent Memorial, and then I worked 5 years at NEA Baptist. I was a hematology, blood bank, microbiology. I was a generalist. I done all departments, and it was something that I thrived in. I loved it, but then I began to feel a weight. It was a weight on me, like, it's something else you're supposed to be doing, and I just kept feeling it, had a relationship with God, and I just kept feeling this weight. And I remember I had just had my first daughter, Jordan Dawson. She's over there, and she was a baby. And, I never wanted my life to be hard because I had been through so much in my childhood. So the only thing that I wanted in my adult life was peace. And so I was like, nah, I never want to go to school where I have kids. I just want to be in that moment. I want to be present. But God had led me to go back to school. And how I got confirmation, it was maybe 7 years prior. I was in a church service back home, and it was a prophet. He wasn't even praying for anybody, but he stood up because God knew I would needed a word. He stood up. He was like, hey, you, what are you pursuing? And I'm thinking, like, what is this man talking about? I don't know. And I said, a degree in clinical laboratory science, because that's the only thing I knew I was pursuing at the time. And he was like, well, I don't see you doing that. You talking about mad. I was mad. Giving you, my life was driven by fear. I didn't want to be like my dad. I didn't want to be a deadbeat. I didn't want to be this. I didn't want to be that. I was just trying to escape it, and I was just trying to create this perfection for my life, not knowing that I couldn't do that. And so I left there, and I remember saying, oh, he was a fake prophet. I don't know why he would speak that over my life. I am getting this degree. I'm almost finna graduate. And that was my attitude, And then so it was maybe 7 years, something like in that range. And I had told my husband, I walked in the house, I was like, babe, I just been feeling like I don't want to retire in this field. And he was like, well, have you ever thought about doing what I do? I was like, what? Like, no. I didn't know anybody that was therapist counselors in my family. He was like, just pray about it. I was like, okay, I'll pray about it. I never forget. Took Jordan for a walk. I was going for a walk. Soon as I walked out the door, I prayed to God. Immediately, guess what came to my remembrance? That prophecy. And when I thought about the prophecy, it described the mental health field so well. And I was like, this whole time, I discarded that word. And so I took that as my confirmation to pursue. And I was like, okay, God, if this is really, I hadn't thought about it. And God brought it back to my remembrance after all those years. And when I thought about everything it said, it matched up perfectly. And I said, okay, God, if I'm going to do this, you're going to have to help me. You're going to have to be with me. You're going to have to go with me on this journey. And that's what I told him. And then I pursued. And let's see. And as I pursued, I faced many obstacles. I remember it was this one day, y'all, it got rough. I was still working at the hospital 36 hours on the weekend because me and my husband, we didn't have any family up here. So he would work during the week. I would work on the weekends, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, night, 7 to 7, so that we could always have somebody with our kids. And we just done that for a while. That's just how we done it. We were self-sufficient. We didn't like asking for help, and it's just what we done. So I would get off, and I would do clinical hours. So when I got in my master's program, at one point, we had to do, once we got upper level, we had to do 30 hours of clinical hours. So I was working 36 hours and, on the weekend. During the week, I was doing 30 hours, and then I was going to my master's class at ASU at night, y'all. And then I had a child. It was a lot. It was a lot. And then I became pregnant with Jada, my second child over there. And her name is Jada Brielle. Brielle is God is my strength. God is my might. Because that's exactly what he was in that season. He was my might. When I tell you God was my strength, I wanted to give up so many times when I was pursuing my master's. It was like even things were going wrong. One day I had got off work and I had to submit this paper. We had to write lots of big papers and different things like that. And I had forgot to do my citations. And so it was a new doctor there, and she had accused me of plagiarism. And when I tell you, that was attack against my identity. My whole life, it had been an attack against my identity. That's where the enemy would attack me. And I'm like, oh, my goodness. It was like that perception. Now people are going to think this about me. Now people are going to think that about me. Am I going to graduate? Most importantly, am I going to get kicked out of this program that I invested so much in? And I remember going home, y'all. I was so depressed. I was so anxious. I was on the floor. I'm talking about like the floor, face down, boo-hoo, crying. My husband, he came in like, what is going on? And I told him, he said, get up, get up. And he made me get up. And he was like, don't you ever let anything or anybody make you cry like that, knock you to the ground like that, make you without hope. And he reminded me who I was. He reminded me that I was a child of God. He reminded me that in this world we're going to have trials and we're going to have tribulation. But God said, be of good cheer because I have overcome the world. God knew that I was struggling. But God, his grace, his mercy carried me because I probably deserved to get kicked out that program. But I thank God for his grace. I thank God for his grace. And that's a mistake I didn't make again. Even though I was tired, I didn't make that mistake again. And the next day, I went to my clinical, and it was a man that walked in, and he was just like, hey, this has never happened while I was at clinicals, working with clients, stuff like that. He's like, come here. Can I tell you something God told me to tell you? I'm thinking like, somebody always trying to tell me something, God. And I'm just like, he talked to me too, you know. And then so this man, y'all, it was like he was up in my house. He literally looked at me and said, I could just see it. He was like, it's like life just be knocking you down. I mean, all the way down to the ground. He said, but God told me to tell you he's going to do it. And the reason why he's going to do it for you is because you keep getting back up. And he said, every time life knocks you down, you keep getting back up. You don't get up because of you. You get up because your faith in God. And he said, God is going to do it for you. And I needed God to carry me through that program because, y'all, I was so tired. I had never been so tired in my life. My earn was low. I was trying to build it up. I had never dealt with low earn. I was like, I don't know how people do this. How do they live life like this? And I was like, Lord, I got to have this baby. I'm in this program. And God carried me. And I graduated the program. About the time I graduated, I had my son. I was finna take my test, my licensure exam. In the hotel, I had to go to Memphis, do a license exam. Y'all, I'm in there. The struggle was real. I'm pumping before the exam. I got to go take a license exam, do my fingerprints, do everything. But God, he was with me. I couldn't even sleep that whole night. My husband, he like, get a hotel in Memphis so that way you won't have to drive. I'm going to take care of the kids. He said, you know, and then that whole night, y'all, I could not sleep. I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do on this exam. But I was just praying. I was worshiping. I was like, God, I need you to carry me. I done everything that I know to do. Lord, I need you to be with me in this moment. And I didn't want to fail that exam because I already had a fear of failure because I had failed in some other areas of my life. And so that fear of failure, so every time I would study for my exam, I would read scriptures about fear and failure. And I had to address that first before I would even study. And then I heard so many people talking about, oh, they failed this national exam. They failed. And then I remember the day I went to take that exam. It was people in the waiting room talking about, oh, I'm scared. I said, oh, don't talk to me. Sometimes in your life, when you believe in God for something, you got to shut people up because people will speak negative to you. They will even put their fears on you. And I knew that how important this was for me. It wasn't just for me. It was what God was calling me to do. It was attached to my purpose. So when people, they was in there, I was like, I said, I'm passing. And that's what I would tell them. Scared as I didn't know what. But I spoke what I knew God was telling me. And sure enough, I did. I passed. I called Larry crying. I was like, babe. And he told me, because he had passed his exam the first time, his national exam the first time. And one thing I love about my husband, he's like, God has no respect to a person. He done it for me. He going to do it for you. Like, we're connected. And I was like, okay. And so I took that and I ran on. I run on with every word. I took that word and I ran on with it. I said, okay, that's my word. I said, he done it for him. He could do it for me. God has no respect to a person. And Lord, I know this is where you're calling me to be. And I called him. I was crying. I was boohooing. He thought I failed. I said, no, I passed. And y'all, it was a happy time for me. It really was. And then fast forward, the one scripture I just want to share that carried me through that was 2 Corinthians 12:9. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. One of the biggest struggles in my life was my identity. I believe I had to prove something. I carry pride. Look at what I done. I done this without my dad's help. He wasn't in my life. He abandoned me. But y'all, do you know there's something that developed in me? I had anger. I even had a sense of pride. Like, I done this myself. I didn't have no help. You know what I'm saying? And that was something that God, he needed to work out of me. And so one day I was coming home from work. I'll never forget. It was Christmas Eve, 2019. I stopped at a store. This time I was working an hour away from Jonesboro, and I stopped at a store in a little town, not knowing that the clerk that was in the store, was going to follow me out and write my tags off my car and give it to the police. Yes, that's what she did. I just went in and got some water. That's all I did. And I paid with some change and $1. I had been working with clients all day. I was just tired and thirsty, and I was stopping and get some water. And she wrote it down. And then next thing I know, my neighbors, like, I think it was the next day, they told me, it's like, oh, it was so many police at your house. Like, what's going on? I'm talking about they was running, they was ducking behind your privacy fence. I was like, what? What's going on? And so I called down there, and it's like, no, ma'am, we would have record of it. Nothing like that happened. And so it was Christmas Eve. 2 officers showed up to my house. Oh, I remember it like it was yesterday. I had booked a massage for my husband, and I was finna take the kids. Golden Corral had, I think, just opened. I was like, we're going to go have brunch. You know, we're just excited, and it was going to do some last-minute Christmas shopping. We still had a mall back then. And then the police was there, and they was like, we're looking for LaTasha Dawson. I'm like, that's me, but what do you want with me? We have a warrant for your arrest. I was like, a what? Y'all, I avoided trouble like the plague. I did not want to be like my dad. You know what I'm saying? I avoided. So I'm like, nah, this can't be real. So I called my mom. She spoke in tongues for about an hour. The police, I put it on speaker, and then I called my sister. She's like, oh, I think it's a scam. She said, go take their license plate, because you know they've been kidnapping people. I said, oh, you might be right. And so I went to the police car and took pictures of it. Y'all, it was a mess. And then sooner or later, they was just like, okay, we're going to have to charge you with resisting arrest if you don't come. And my husband, being who he is, he was like, Tasha, you know, pretty much he was just telling me to go quietly without a fight. He was like, I don't want to make it a traumatic experience for the kids. Yet and still, he was protecting me. He was protecting our family. He never wanted our kids to have to go through what I went through. And I trusted him. So I went. He told me, he's like, I got you, baby. I'm going to get you out. And I don't even know what all he went through, because it's Christmas Eve, and he got to try to find a lawyer to get me out. And y'all, I was acting a monkey in that car. I was like the police officer was like, okay, we're gonna wait till you get to the car and put the handcuffs on. I was like, well, I need my phone. I had to call my mother-in-law, crying, I'm scared, I don't know what to do. And I'm just crying in the car to her, telling her, oh, we getting there, I don't know what I'm gonna do up in here. And then so we get in there, and then the lady started saying, take off your boots, take off your jewelry. And I could see through a little window, it was some men walking around. I'm like, oh my God, I gotta get naked right here. And then I was freaking out, y'all. And then she was literally telling me, you need to be quiet because you're going to make it worse for yourself when you go back there. I was like, I don't care about them. You know, I was just letting her know I didn't care about them. Like, I don't even know why I'm here. They said forgery. I didn't know what they were talking about. So once I got back there, got booked and everything, y'all, I was a mess. I was just crying and crying off my leg. I was just acting a fool back there because I was scared. And then to make a long story short, I got out. God gave my husband favor with a lawyer. He was able to call the judge, and the lawyer was on holiday, and he was I think in Texas somewhere, and he still called the judge, made the officer come down, set a bond. They didn't even have a bond set for me. Made him come, drive for the time, set a bond. They set a bond, but during the interrogation, y'all, it was like a movie. That man, he threw down a stack. He was like, I was like, what did I do? And he was like, you committed forgery. You spent counterfeit $100 bills. And I was like, what? No, I did not. And he said, well, I got this evidence saying you did. And I was like, I don't care what you got. I didn't do it. So I'm in there arguing with the man, and he just trying to interrogate me, and your husband is involved too. But we haven't figured out how. And I was like, what? And he was like, well, who is that woman he cheating with? And he was just saying all kinds of stuff. I said, what do you mean cheating? He said, it was a woman driving the car. And he was just like asking me about my hair, because we had just came back from Cancun, and I had these long braids down here. And he knew that the person that they had on video had a short haircut. And so he trying to ask me, how long you had your hair like that? And come to find out, you know, I had my hair braided up way before, you know, that happened. I had the receipts, everything in the show for it. But you would think with all the evidence they had that it wasn't me, that I would have got let go. They even had videos. And so even one of the officers, he was very nice to me. I was telling him I was so scared. I was like, I really don't want to go back there. I'm scared. You know, can you take your time? And so he did. God gave me favor with him. I thank God for that, man. And so I did go in the cell with one girl, and we was talking. I'm in there in the jail cell trying to help her with her problems. And I'm in there in counselor mode. She telling me her story, and I'm just like, girl, it's going to be okay. You know, the whole time I'm a mess. And then by that time, my husband had bailed me out. Christmas Eve, I had to get it together. Didn't want my kids to know that I had been arrested. I was so ashamed. Made it through Christmas. Then Christmas came, and during Christmas, right the day after, I had to be in court. When I had to be in court, another police officer came, and guess what? He served me with another felony and said I had a second count of forgery. He said in another town, he said, oh, if you done it here, you must have done it in this town 20 minutes away. And they pinned all those charges on me. I was facing 5 years in prison. It dragged out over and over. One of the things that happened, the lawyer had told me, well, they offer you a plea. And I was like, I don't want no plea. You know, pretty much we hired you. Why would I take a plea? You know, I didn't do this. And I have all of this evidence showing that I didn't do it. And he was literally telling me, he's like, well, this is an all-white town. They're never going to go against the police. He said, and he literally told me, he said, the George Floyd case has made it hard for you. And I said, how? They don't even connect it to anything. He said, they're never going to say that you walked in here and they falsely accused you. And basically that's what we're saying. Then my husband, being who he is, he did what he done, got rid of him, spent some more money. It's about time it was over. I think he spent $14,000, $15,000, hired another lawyer. And to make a long story short, y'all, I was so depressed. I couldn't even get out of bed. This was like 2020, 2021. I was very depressed. I was very low. Like the one thing that I tried to avoid my whole life, like getting in trouble, have a negative persona, character attached to me. It had fallen up on me, and it was nothing that I could do. I was so depressed. My husband was trying to encourage me. He was always there every beat. He was going through things too, because I was going through things, and he couldn't help me. And then he couldn't go to court with me because it was during COVID. So I was just faced with a loan. God just kept telling me it's going to be dismissed. And every time he would tell me it was going to be dismissed, it was continued. Every time he told me it was going to be dismissed, I was so discouraged, y'all. And I was like, God, I know I heard you say this was going to be dismissed, this was going to be dropped. And then finally one day, after 2 years and 3 months, I don't know how many times I went back and forth to court, how much emotional stress I went through, it was finally dismissed. And then I did go to trauma-focused therapy because I was dealing with a lot of hatred in my heart. And I was feeling like life wasn't fair. And I was just like, how can you do everything right? And then I didn't realize, God, He will take the things, the trials that we go through, because we have prejudice. We have so many things sin in our world. It was never God's design for it to be that way. But He would even take those bad things and get out of you what He needs. And that's exactly what God did for me during that season. The Bible says in Isaiah 64:6 that our righteousness is like filthy rags. Everything that I thought made me strong, everything that I thought made me enough wasn't what I thought it was. I realized that I didn't have to perform anymore after going through this, you guys. I didn't have to prove my worth. I could just show up broken, wounded, in a mess, and let God meet me there. And He did. He took the fear, the pain, the abandonment, my anger, and He began to turn it into purpose. That season humbled me. It broke my pride. It brought me closer to God in ways I had never experienced before. I began to understand more about my father and his struggles with mental illness and the ways he coped with drugs and alcohol. I began to forgive him. I was in counseling. I was working through things. I was learning more things about myself. And it didn't excuse what he did, but it gave me a different perspective. And by the grace of God, I was able to forgive him before he passed away. Today, I don't have that anger because I had so much anger. Have y'all ever watched the movie Purge? Literally, that's how much anger I had, not towards my dad, but towards them people that locked me up. I was so mad, y'all. I was literally wishing for a purge day. And God, I had to lay that on the altar. I had so much hate in my heart for them. And I'm just being real, y'all, because my whole life was turned upside down. And then one day, God was like, get up. It's time to fight. I got up after the depression. I was still going through it, but I got up out the bed and I started moving. I started gathering evidence. I started fighting my case, and I started finding my strength in God, and I started finding what the Word of God said about my situation. And I was like, no, God. And what God did, He used that bad situation, and He got that pride out of me so that He could use me for His glory. So now when I show up on purpose. When I show up to step on the enemy's head. Every time I go to work, it's about ministry. Every time I go to work, it's about breaking the chains. It's about bringing insight into mental illness, because I couldn't save my dad, but guess what? It's 1,000, it's 100 other people that I can touch the lives, and then maybe they will become a better dad. Maybe they become a better mom. God used me to help people every day, not just me, but my whole family. My whole family. And I just thank God that my dad's chapter, they said at his funeral, this is not the end. He has another chapter. And I was that next chapter. And every day I live my life on purpose. I told God, I said, God, if I make it out of this, y'all, I'm scary when it comes to prison and jail and stuff like that. I like a soft life. I like tea, and I like to, I like sense, and like I wasn't about that. And I was like, no. And to think that I could have been taken away from my kids for 5 years,
because someone chose to say that I was the African-American lady that came in the day before and spent counterfeit $100 bills. And even though they saw all the evidence, even though those girls was like maybe 150 pounds smaller than me, didn't even have the same complexion, they refused to let it go because they had a 99% conviction rate. But my God, every day I stood up in there, I done my makeup, I dressed up. I didn't care who was in there looking like a bum. I'm going to show up like my father is the king. And I would show up to court. Sometimes while I'm driving home, my face just crying, my makeup, my lashes gone. But I didn't care. I knew who God was, and he told me it was going to be dismissed. And that's what I stood on. And I was so disappointed time and time and time again. But let me tell you, my God came through for me. And then one day, all the cognitive distortions that I was dealing with from my childhood, I finally broke through it. I finally was able to see clearly. I finally was able to love with the love that God has commanded us to love with. And y'all, and he's still doing a work in me. And he's not finished writing this story. And I just thank God. I thank God for what he's done into my life. I thank God for y'all allowing me to share this with you. What the enemy meant to harm me, God has used for good. If you're here tonight and you're feeling broken, if you're feeling rejected, if you're feeling afraid, I want you to know that God can take every part of your story and turn it into purpose. I am living proof.